This episode of the Media Leader Podcast was edited by our production partner, Trisonic. For a full range of audio, media buying, and creative services, including podcast production, check out trisonic.co.uk.
Our bosses are matched as being the most important person who can affect positively or negatively our mental wellness and our mental health, along with our spouse.
Welcome to the Media Leader Podcast. I'm Jack Benjamin. Are managers well equipped to wear all the different hats that we ask of them in today's workplace? It's a question worth considering in an era where, according to Nabs All Ears study, managers are increasingly being hired younger, report being undertrained, and have become more and more responsible for the mental health of their workers. Sue Todd is the CEO of Nabs, the media and advertising industry charity focused on workplace wellness. Longtime listeners of the podcast know that Sue joined us this time last year to discuss concerns around stress and burnout, especially around the pitch process. This time, I wanted to invite her back to talk about a new initiative Nabs launched this fall called Managers Mindsets. It's a free resource which aims to offer mental health management training. We talked about managers' mindsets, but also about whether managers are set up for success within our industry more broadly, given what appears to be a chronic lack of time and resource. This is that conversation. I hope you enjoy. Sue Todd, welcome back to the Media Leader Podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Something that was highlighted in both Nabs All Ears study as well as the industry-wide All-In census is that managers are being asked to take on more responsibilities in the workplace and aren't necessarily being trained to handle all those responsibilities. And I'm curious what you've seen in terms of, has that been a big change in recent years?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've highlighted exactly what we've been thinking about for the last 18 months since we first saw the all-in census data that showed that, whilst a third of the industry overall indicated that they were struggling with stress and anxiety, the group within that, in terms of levels, that were struggling the most and had the over-indexed on that were middle managers. So, that was one thing that kind of got flagged to us in that data. And then in terms of our own consultation that we did off the back of All In about a whole bunch of stuff last year, to dig deeper into what really was driving some of the, rising demand that we were seeing through the Nabs services and through the advice line around mental wellness, to dig into, why and what some of the potential changes Nabs could make in terms of service offer were to support the industry and individuals more. And one of the key findings was that there seemed to be this kind of what we call broken step on the people management ladder, that group of entry-level managers were getting less and less support as they moved into those roles. I think the statistic was that only 90% of new managers got training.
Any training,
yeah, to do the job of management, I guess. Wow. I guess specifically it was about, as you entered this role, did you get support to become a sort of competent manager? So, that figure really startled us. And it's coupled with, I think, the sort of other data that we know about. There's a bit of a perfect storm that, more and more managers seem to be what's been coined broadly accidental managers. There's data beyond our sector that says something like over 80% of people seem to fall into management as opposed to kind of beyond this very intentional and specific career path. And that, coupled with that, we know from our industry that nearly half, 42% of people, if they had a challenge, if they were struggling with their mental wellness or mental health, and felt they needed to raise it with someone, it would be their line manager first, half of all people. So I think we've kind of got this perfect storm of, we seem to have more and more people challenge themselves who are in management positions, so they're feeling the pressure, but the responsibility on them is becoming higher as well at the same time. And we're not 100% sure about this, but our hypothesis is they're getting less training, and that's possibly as a result of less resources and budget cuts over recent years. So they're going into those jobs a bit younger and a bit less trained and supported. So it's a bit of a perfect storm. And I think we thought this is something that, we should lean into and work with the industry to try and come up with an even more comprehensive program to give more support to that group of people, because they're key, absolutely critical to how people feel within work and how people cope with challenges.
You mentioned it could be a lack of resource. I'm curious what might be behind some of this decision making in terms of if the vast majority, sounds like, of sort of early career-ish managers are not getting any training at all. That doesn't surprise me as positive. I'm curious, is it that it's not getting raised by the very people that are coming into management positions to say, hey, I'm really excited to join this role, but I need to upskill a little bit? Or is it that from a top-down level, there's just no organization in place to make sure that people are upskilling? I guess I'm sort of curious how can we solve that issue and where the issue is coming from?
I mean, we don't 100% know all the reasons why. I mean, I think we feel generally that, budgets have been tight since COVID for lots of people on training. And I think some of the pressure in terms of resources and talent issues that we have in the industry are probably not helping. Because I think we're in a position where, I think we all feel it. There's not much slack in the system, so to speak, in terms of how much time pressure most of us are on to do our jobs. We've taken our eye off the ball when it comes to remembering the importance, I think, of this particular group of people and how significant they are to making sure people thrive at work. I think the job's got harder as well. I sense that, the requirements we have of that kind of middle management level are greater. We're doing lots of, we're a fast-paced industry, and a lot of the excitement of that is why lots of us love it. Change is relentless to a certain extent. And I think, managing change and managing people through change and uncertainty takes a certain skill. And I think if we are promoting people a bit faster and then we're not putting the right support in, it's almost inevitable that we're not quite taking enough time to just, I guess, intentionally remember that an awful big part of your job, if you manage people, is making sure, checking in that people are okay and in a good place to thrive at work. I can feel it myself. I think we can all sense that you occasionally have to just step back and think, we're running at 100 miles an hour on task. But, an enormous part of what I'm here to do is create the environment and to make sure the people who I'm responsible for developing and supporting feel, that I'm asking the questions if they're under pressure and they're starting to feel that it's too much. So I think we can all sense that. I don't think it's a surprise to people, if I'm honest. And everybody we've presented the data to and talked to in consultation about this area have kind of nodded emphatically. So I think it's recognised. I'm not sure 100% exactly why, but I think it's a combination of factors. And I think there's a general sense from the industry and the people I've spoken to that this is real, and that it's the right time for us to have this conversation and to try and put some more measures back into place to support people in this space.
You mentioned that there's an increase in sort of a younger management. Is there a reason? I mean, we've talked a lot about the talent crisis in this industry over the past couple of years. Is it as simple as we need people to fulfill roles and this is the next person up?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think there's some general chat in lots of industries. I saw a piece in the Sunday Times the other week from, I think it was the recruitment sector, that was quite interesting. They talked about the fact that there's an element of younger professionals looking up at management and finding it less attractive or aspirational than potentially maybe we used to. I think the PR headline on this piece was something like, conscious unbossing is here.
Okay.
Which obviously caught my attention, so it worked. But I kind of, and our data in the All Ears survey sort of supports that a bit, because although I'm not sure we're yet seeing people stepping away from wanting to be a manager, we got some data that suggested that people are looking up at their bosses and seeing and feeling that they look overwhelmed and that it doesn't look like as attractive a job. So I think if we're not careful, we not only have a short-term problem with people not feeling supported enough, and obviously we all know that the consequences of not picking up, noticing, asking, checking in, and therefore providing the adequate support to someone who's beginning to really struggle can be really serious for the individual and clearly for the organisation. It's also the case that, longer term, we might well be setting ourselves up for an issue where people just don't really fancy taking on the job of managing others. They're looking at it and going, don't really fancy it, don't think the reward, matches the challenge and the level of worry, I guess, and commitment that you have to make if you want to take on the job. So I think we have to think short and long term about making sure people see that as, a rewarding career that gets the right level of support. and that they're in a competent and capable place to be able to do it really well. Because, we know that there's some statistic from, I think, the CMI or the Workplace Institute that says our bosses are matched as being the most important person who can affect positively or negatively our mental wellness and our mental health, along with our spouse. So, we know that it's an incredibly powerful and important role, and we kind of owe it to that group of people who want to and aspire to become great managers, but also to the people that they have in their teams to make sure they feel confident, capable, and able to support their people. And by the way, that doesn't mean, they have to turn into therapists or they have to be able to deal with all levels of challenges that people face in their personal and professional lives. But I think it does mean we need to give them adequate support to feel confident to both notice in themselves and others when people are struggling, and to initiate the conversations and know where to signpost and provide the right level of help for people. So that's, I guess, where Nabs sort of steps in, I think, and says, look, we'll have a look at all our services, and we've developed a new very comprehensive program to try and address those specific issues, so that the managers themselves get more support, but obviously we raise their capability in terms of supporting others as well.
Yeah, I do want to talk about it. It's called Managers Mindsets.
That's
right.
The
initiative.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit more about the training program. You mentioned it's meant to, I guess, address both managers' own mental health and making sure they're okay themselves, but then also give them sort of the tools to then work with the rest of their team and be a little bit more responsive. So
definitely.
What goes into the training initiative?
Well, I mean, it's, as you said, it's about raising awareness of the subject, providing some self-care for those managers, and then giving the adequate tools to do that for their teams too. So those are the core objectives. So we kind of looked top to bottom at where we needed in the Nabs offer to offer help. We have an advice line that is open to everybody. And obviously that itself is often one place where people, managers and others, come in to chat one-to-one about some of the specific issues they have, either how they're feeling or something that they've got going on with a team member. So we already had the advice line, but we said, actually, what we need to do is pull out the sort of, in this case, 5 key areas that we think would make the biggest difference in terms of development and training. So we've created these 5 online workshops that are 2.5 hours each, very bite-sized and incredibly practical, because I think one of our insights is that whilst a lot of people know the theory of management and creating psychological safety and being able to kind of resolve conflict and topics like that, the reality is that sometimes you really do need the practical practice as well. So these workshops are very rooted in practicing and, doing it with other people from the industry, which I think really helps. When I did the first module, you're not only getting great insight from the trainers who are obviously experts in these topics. I got loads of tips from other people that were on the program from different parts of the industry. Just a couple of lines or a way that somebody had tackled a particular issue that I thought that's a really nice way of phrasing that, and that's really helpful, because sometimes it's just language or the way into something, that a conversation that helps you start and support somebody who's struggling. So there's 5 modules, and the first 2 have already launched within the charity and have been up and running and full pretty much. Every time we put them out there, they get filled up incredibly quickly. So we know the demand and the need is there. And the first one is about having mental health wellness conversations. It's just providing the basics of how to notice in yourself and in others when people might be beginning to struggle, show signs of stress or anxiety that's not healthy, because, and giving people a sense of what that might look like. And one of the things I thought was incredibly powerful in that first program is that, just this idea that, if you know your team and you spend enough adequate time with them face to face often, you kind of know what their norm is, because obviously we're all different. You need to know what the baseline is for people, because some people can cope with a different level of stress or pressure to others. But it's really about spotting when changes happen in people's behaviour, either the way they're behaving at work or how withdrawn they are, or, maybe how they're kind of behaving in meetings or missing deadlines or anything like that. And paying enough attention to see that that's not just a one-off, then catching it early. So a large part of what we talk about in the first module is a kind of what we call the mental health continuum, and essentially a kind of little guideline to help you think about whether your people are shining, thriving, which are obviously means they're in pretty positive places in terms of coping with any of the pressures of their job, to surviving, which is when people you begin to spot that they are they have there are signs that they're beginning to find the challenges of life or work a bit much, into languishing, and finally a position of being in a crisis. And I think what many of us do, and what really our jobs as manager is to stop doing, is sometimes leave things a little bit too long to have the conversation. And that's about confidence, and that's about noticing, and that's about feeling not scared to raise that conversation. So that module is all about that, really, the basics of how to raise a conversation. And then we also offer one about essential coaching skills. We've got one about how to help your team collectively cope when there's a particular increase in pressure. The fourth module is about leading through change when there's a big restructure or a potential big change going on for your organization overall, or your team, or an individual on personal or work-related transitions. And then the final module is about becoming an inclusive leader. So we've tried to find a way to tackle in a really practical way, because we're very conscious that people's time is tight, and our experience of doing time 2 training over the years has led us to believe that 2.5 hours is a kind of sweet spot in terms of people's time and what we can realistically offer to people and they can commit to. So there's 5 modules. We've also made sure that around that, there's what we have called in Nabs Explore and Connect sessions, which are 90-minute safe spaces for people to self-select themselves onto around topics that just can pop up now and then around competent management, things like giving and receiving feedback, creating safe spaces, navigating challenging conversations. So they are also available in the charity. And then we're also doing speed mentoring. We did a first session for 70 middle managers 2 weeks ago, and we'll be doing that again, where we pair newer managers with more experienced managers from the industry who volunteered to mentor. And that was incredibly powerful, just to see beyond what Nabs does from a training perspective, what practical tips people who've been there, seen it, done it have got for newer managers who want to learn and grow. So it's a pretty comprehensive program, and it's all free in the charity, as Nabs services all are, for people to self-select onto. And so far we can see that it's going really well, and I think it will run and run, because all the sessions are filling up very quickly.
And I should clarify, the 5 different modules would be each 30 minutes as a total of 2.5 hours, as opposed to each individual module that is 2.5 hours?
No, they're 2.5 hours each.
Oh, wow,
at the
okay.
moment. They're 2.5 hours each. And it's not compulsory. Nobody needs to go on all 5. People might look at the content and think, I'm definitely going to do the first one and see how I go. Or people might jump into coaching straight away. It's totally self-selecting for individuals, like all Nabs charitable services are. But they're 2.5 hours each. At the moment, the first 2 are up and running, and we'll be rolling out the next 3 across the year. I mean, we'll see. I think we will learn about whether people find they've got capacity over maybe 6 months or 9 months to do all 5. And obviously we'll look at whether, that's something that people want to do and want to do it in a certain order. But at the moment, it's just the first 2 are available, the next 3 are coming, and people self-select themselves onto it as and when. They run every month of the year.
What would you say to any business leader out there that might be listening that might argue that managers, it isn't necessarily their responsibility to be like a workplace therapist or something?
Yeah.
I mean, there are people, maybe not as loudly in this industry that I've heard from, that would say this, but certainly people in the business community more largely that might take that tact. I mean, what would you say to them?
Well, I'd say that, of course, the job of a therapist or a counsellor is entirely different to the job of a manager. And I think that's partly what the programme, particularly the first one, sort of aims to tackle, because it's kind of part of the fear of people leaning into stuff is that they feel they might get it wrong, or they might do more harm than good, or they can't possibly have enough skills to help someone with something, I don't know, as significant as struggling with grief, or something that could be going on at work with a difficult client. But the reality is that all of us can learn as the first line of kind of attack to support someone at work how to have a conversation, to suggest to someone that we've noticed that they might be struggling and to listen and hear them in terms of what they might lack some support for and some help on. So I think the basics have always been the role of manager. I don't think we're asking people to be to do anything different that we've also always asked them. I think it's just that we're potentially seeing people more likely to ask their manager to help them, and that's a good thing. I think if there has been a change in 20 years in work, that's positive. It's probably that, although not true for everybody, more people might be inclined to raise that they need some support with their boss. And I think, the reality is that we want people who are thriving at work and thriving in life. And, anyone who's managed for any period of time knows when they've got, a whole team of people thriving, how positive and rewarding and joyful and positive it is for everybody. And, we all know what it's like when we can see that someone's not on their top game. And the fundamental truth is that if they're not going to go straight to a therapist because they might not feel that's needed or adequate, then, like I said earlier, half of them are more likely to talk to their boss first. And also, the other stat is that we know people don't necessarily leave companies or roles. They often leave a boss. There's stats that say if their boss isn't adequately managing them and they feel that they work somewhere where they are unsupported, that, is more likely to be a reason for them to exit. So, for all sorts of reasons, even just on a selfish level, not needing to hire someone else and not wanting to be in a position where you're looking for another talented member of the team, apart from the, moral responsibility we all have, it doesn't make business sense really to ignore this topic. And we're certainly not asking people and expecting people to become specialists or therapists, but they are the first line of defense for their people's welfare.
I'm curious how much of not just mental health issues, but some of the other issues you talked about in terms of talent retention and sort of promoting younger members into more senior roles at younger ages comes down to an issue around remuneration. Not so that money solves all problems, but I think a lot of people, certainly we saw it with the cost of living crisis, became more stressed around their personal financial well-being. I know Nabs was also offering services about this, especially over the past 18 to 24 months. I'm curious how much you think simply being able to pay more to staff members would solve some of these issues, and or if it's going to cause more issues now that national insurance are having a spike in how much agencies are going to pay, that could have a downstream effect on who can get remunerated, how much money they might be able to earn, whether that could cause other problems. I'm curious how you're thinking about these tensions as well.
Well, I think, we know from our own data that says why people call Nabs and what they seek help on, that one of the top 3 reasons people call us is for financial advice or financial difficulties. So, especially in the last, as you say, 24 months, but it's always been a key reason that people seek help. So although emotional support and mental health is number 1 and redundancy is often the second biggest reason people call it, finances do really matter. So there's no question that it creates anxiety and stress and pressure for people. I'm not sure it's the number 1 reason, and we didn't in the All Ears survey get that sense from people. We got the sense that the most prevalent reason that people's stress and anxiety was higher was more about just feeling that the resource generally to do the job well wasn't there. So although you could argue that, one aspect of resources is how many people are there and how much people get rewarded and recognised for the work they do, and clearly that matters, I think it's more prevalent that people just feel pushed to the max in terms of what they're capable of delivering, and that feels like a more prevalent reason for people struggling and then having to raise with their boss that they need some support than remuneration specifically. Although, I'm not suggesting for a second that there aren't cases where, pay and remuneration and recognition more broadly don't make a huge difference to how people feel. So, it's definitely key. We found in the, last 24 months when we've offered grants to people, to the industry, they get taken up very quickly. It is one other part of what Nabs does. We do offer financial assistance to people who are really struggling. So just, take this opportunity to reiterate that. I know it's not specifically about managers, but, we do offer grants to people who find themselves having problems. And I know the industry overall over the last 24 months, lots of companies have tried to offer one-off payments to people. So even if they can't, raise everyone's salaries up, 5 or 10%, they have offered sort of spot support for people where they've needed it. So I'm hoping it's a bit less of an issue in the next 24 months if inflation stays low. But, there's no question that it's, one of the key things that drives stress and anxiety for people if they find themselves in financial difficulty. And often, again, people do benefit from getting some advice. We offer advice in terms of, we do connect sessions around how to get yourself out of financial difficulty, as well as practical grants for people who are really struggling. And I think companies are also leaning into offering more financial advice for people because, sometimes it's about a way to get yourself out of a hole, whether that's a temporary grant or some really sound advice about how to navigate some financial difficulties. So I think you have to do all of those things and clearly pay attention to your resources and remuneration as well. Because yes, if people are feeling completely overwhelmed and they're also feeling completely underpaid, of course, that's a bit of a recipe for a disaster.
Yeah, it just strikes me that there might be a through line in terms of clearly there's a bit of a lack of resource when it comes to just training new managers who might be put into roles at a younger age when they're, I don't want to say not necessarily ready for it, but certainly maybe could do with some more training. And that strikes me as partially probably a resource issue. And then there's also other resource issues that could lead to other stressors. And that through line, obviously it's great that Nabs exists to offer some support to help. But it strikes me that there's a broader organizational concern, I suppose, around how much resource does a media company have that it can then make sure that people are not completely overwhelmed with the amount of work that they're doing because they're not trying to ask too few people to do too much, and then also hopefully paying them adequately for the work that they're then producing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's no question. We know it's been a tough economic climate for the last 4 or 5 years. You only have to switch on the news to know that UK PLC needs more growth. And I think, all industries have probably felt that to some extent. So I don't think we should shy away from the fact that it's been a hard few years. But clearly, I think part of what people want and recognise when they are in a slightly tougher climate is to feel that their organisation, their team, their manager has kind of got their back and recognises that. And sometimes I think what really makes a difference when we're in those broader, tougher, slightly more volatile conditions is to feel like within the kind of confines of your team or your organisation, you're in it together and, other things that might help you feel supported are made available to you. And sometimes that can be training. I mean, sometimes that can be, financial assistance, of course, but sometimes that can be just feeling like you're progressing and you've got the support and you're heard and that some of the challenges that you're facing are recognised and understood. So, a large part of what I have seen at Nabs in the last 2.5 years since I've been here on various programs that I've jumped into to better understand our offer is, I'm not for one suggesting that this is a fix for everybody, but, you often see when people go onto the various programs that, understanding that some of the things they're struggling with are common and suffered or felt by people in other businesses. And then you offer them both some potential solutions to help themselves get out of that place, but also they've got some more contacts and sometimes friendships from different parts of the industry. Sometimes that can make a real difference to people. So I think, not underestimating the fact that, being heard and offered support in lots of different ways, if times are a bit tougher, is often the first step to someone feeling like they've, this role and this job is okay, and they're going to stay, and they're gonna thrive again.
If I was a newly minted middle manager, just got a promotion from a more junior position to a more senior position, and I'm having a conversation with you, I'm a little nervous about starting the job and feeling like a bit overwhelmed already. What would the advice that you would personally give to me, whether it's just calming me down or maybe something more tangible that I could go back to my employees with?
I mean, one of the things I do suggest to people is to call our advice line, because I think people perceive that they can only ring an advice line when they're in a crisis. And increasingly, the people who do call us sometimes just want to use us as a sounding board to run something by us, either something that they are thinking about raising with a boss, raising in their organization, or as a boss, a way that they're potentially considering raising something with a team member. And I genuinely think that one of the best things people can do is, I know it's not the 1980s, so we're not going to sit around and do role plays. It's just run stuff through with somebody. Sometimes it can just be a 10-minute conversation with someone on our advice line, or someone in your organization who you're close to and trust and know would be supportive. How you are thinking of raising something, or how you are thinking of instigating a conversation. I personally find it really helpful to say things out loud, to just find the right start point, the right phraseology, the right language, the right first question. So I think that can be really helpful. And I would strongly recommend people think about the advice line for sounding board rather than, oh my goodness, I'd only ring an advice line if I was in an absolute crisis and I, was at the point of last resort, because they're really good at just listening for 10 minutes and helping people think about maybe the first step to solve a problem. So that would be my one piece of advice. And my second piece of advice is just, it's very, very difficult to do this, but I think this conversation I have with myself all the time, and I definitely don't always succeed at it personally, is just you need to slow down and find some reflection time to just pay attention to your team and yourself. We run very, very quickly. I do. We get through a lot in a week. We push ourselves pretty hard, I think, in this industry because, there's a lot to do. We love it. Lots of it's positive. We're hardworking and high energy. And if you don't just pause and pay attention to where you're at, and then remember to just pause with your team and just check in and ask a question about how they are, or raise something that you've noticed in terms of them looking or behaving slightly different to normal, from whatever that normal is, then you can go weeks or months and something can become much bigger for yourself or your team than it needed to be. It's the most fundamental thing I think about when you might be moving from someone who was thriving to surviving to potentially beginning to languish or get into a point of a crisis. I think prevention and raising things early and noticing things early is the number one thing that most of us should do more of. And it does require you to stop rushing around quite so much and just pay a bit more attention. So I hate to sound like some sort of Zen Buddha, but we need a little bit more mindfulness and work. And it's not always possible, but I think, that's the thing I need to do more of. And I think if all of us found a little bit more capacity for that, we would probably solve more problems quicker and they'd become less serious.
Well, it's very sage advice that I'll probably be looking to take just as well. Sue Todd, it's a great way to end it. Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Media Leader podcast. This episode was edited by our production partners, Trisonic. You can find and listen to all our episodes on our website at themedialeader.co.uk or wherever you get your podcasts. But just remember, please do subscribe to be notified when we release our next episode. From all of us at The Media Leader, I'm editor Omar Oakes. Our executive producer is Jack Benjamin. See you next time.